reflect together on maybe what looking forward may be if we try and take our responsibility seriously. I'm going to only do one Bible verse today, and here it is about dads, one of the few verses directed specifically at fathers, and it says this in Ephesians: "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." So I'm a dad. I've got a picture up. Well, I don't have a picture up. Maybe I will. Next slide for me, thanks. Of me with my kids. My eldest turned 13, a couple of months ago. And basically since kind of then, I've noticed a bit of a shift in my relationship with him, in the sense that I feel like he is coming to me more now in a kind of like, what do you have to say about this sort of vibe? I don't know if that's an experience of the older dads in the room, that somewhere around when they became a teenager, they started looking to dad more than maybe they did pre that. My other younger children, less so, but certainly Hugo and I now connect a lot. And so I've been spending quite a few weeks and months just reading as much as I can about how to not be a bad dad, how to try my best to be an okay one. I'm very lucky. I think I won the dad lottery. That's my father on the right there with my son Orson. He's an absolute legend of a man. And if anyone's met my father, I think you'd probably agree he's a pretty good bloke. If you haven't met him, sucks to be you. He's a really good guy. And so I guess I just wanted to flag from the beginning here, I'm going to talk a bit about fatherhood and a bit about what I think dads are supposed to do. And I'm doing that from a position of zero authority. I'm doing it as a co-learner who's kind of just walking into this, I think, in a really serious level for me right now. And I'm going to share with you a whole bunch of ideas and thoughts that I've come across that I've found helpful, in the hope that everyone in the room might find that helpful too. And if you're not a dad, if you're not even a bloke, I want to flag that when God created man, he decided that wasn't enough. He actually needed to create woman as well. Because for the fullness of God to be displayed in humanity, for us to properly represent his image, actually required both men and women to exist. And when we think about the roles that blokes and women play, it's not like they're two different kind of things. It's much more like a Venn diagram, I think, in that there are elements of which both of us as blokes and women can do. And so while I'm going to talk a lot about fatherhood, I would say every single thing I say, women can absolutely do. There is nothing in here that you're going to go, I don't have to do any of those because that's the bloke's response. No, that's not how God works. God does all of these things. And he specially charges some of us to do one over the other, but doesn't mean that that's exclusively someone's role to the exclusion of others. So I just wanted to flag that as well. And finally, last flag, I get that not everyone has great dads. And I hope today you don't walk away thinking, gosh, my life sucks. That's absolutely not my goal. My goal here is to reflect together on maybe what looking forward may be if we try and take our responsibility seriously. I'm going to only do one Bible verse today, which I'm sure we're all grateful for. And here it is about dads, one of the few verses directed specifically at fathers. And it says this in Ephesians: "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." That small verse has a lot to unpack in it. And my goal as a preacher today is to hopefully help you understand what it's trying to say. I'm going to go word by word or keyword by keyword, and we'll unpack it together. The first keyword I want to start on is exasperate. There's always this difficulty with Bible translators, because this wasn't written in English, it was written in another language, and they try and find the best word to explain to us, a modern audience, that captures that word, but they never quite do it well enough because languages are different. So the word exasperate, I don't know Greek at all. I can't pronounce it, but I did the research on it. Is the word par or gizet, that word, which really means power means para or towards, and orgazet means provoke to frustration. Put another way is, exasperate in this context is trying to mean that there's something about the way that we can parent that can cause our children to be in a perpetual state of frustration. That they can live their life kind of on the edge of a blow up at all times. It's not the same as when your kid doesn't unpack the dishwasher like it's their job to unpack the dishwasher, and you tell them they've got to unpack the dishwasher or they're banned from the Nintendo for a week, and they get angry at you, and then they unpack the dishwasher, and then it's back to normal life, that moment of anger is not what the exasperate's talking about here. It's not the same sort of thing. What this is talking about is almost like a settled frustration, like it's become part of their character to be frustrated. And it's, what the author here is saying is there is something about the way that we can parent that can cause our kids to be always on close to anger. You've probably met someone like that. Maybe you yourself are a bit like that. Maybe when I walk into the room, if my kids are immediately on edge, thinking, what's he going to say? I've caused this. Or it's not just about in their relationship to you, it's in their relationship to the world as well. They could be perpetually frustrated. I see this heaps as a teacher, where there are young people who every day are frustrated and annoyed and unable to face the world as it actually is and perpetually dream as though life should be easy and how dare it not be. We can parent in a way that enables that. So then the author goes on, so what do we do about that? Well, it gives us 2 words. It says that we need to instead bring them up in training and instruction. And those 2 words, there's a Greek origin for them. Sorry for the pronunciation for the scholars in the room, but they are paideia and nouthesia. I don't know. How'd I go? Not great. Okay. The first word there, I've actually got some pictures from Rocky to kind of summarize what they're like, right? Yeah, there we go. Or Creed, actually, which is basically a Rocky movie. Anyway, the one on the left is really about the sort of thing that a coach would do to someone, preparing them for battle, preparing them for a competition, preparing them for a contest, where the coach just says, 10 push-ups, get up, go for a run, do this right now, no discussion. It's that role of a coach that stands behind the guy doing this one and saying, faster, 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 faster. What it means is the sort of thing that a parent does when they set rules for their family that simply state, this is what we do as part of our family, and that's the end of the discussion. For us as a family, we do this in the sense that we come to church on Sundays. It just is what we do. We don't let our kids take their iPads into their bedrooms. That's a rule that we simply have. It's part of who we are. We don't allow them to have social media accounts. We've just decided that. We don't allow them to watch certain movies at their age. That's just a thing we have decided. We make them unpack the dishwasher. It's a thing we have decided. And that's a core part of being a parent, is having things that you've just decided that don't come with an explanation. It just is how it is. We don't lie to each other. End of discussion. What Paul is saying, the author is saying, is that to not have our kids raised in a way that makes them frustrated by everything, we have to have some of that strict moral code that is true regardless of what's going on, so that when the hard times come, you know your true north. It just is how it is. But if too much of that's a problem, right? Like if you grew up in a situation where a parent was only ever, this is my way, this is how it is, no discussion, end of discussion. As a child, you feel unheard. As a child, you would feel like you don't know why things have been done. You'll get frustrated because when you have a reasonable reason to not do that thing, you can't tell them about the reason why you have that thing because you're so black and white. So we need that component, but we also need this other component, which is where Sylvester Stallone puts on glasses and has a chat, right? That's his way of indicating I'm in like hardcore mode and I'm in reflective mode, right? That word nouthesia literally means to put into the mind. And so part of what we have to do to avoid this, what we've described happening, is we have to have answers for why we've done things the way we've done them and open up a dialogue with our children so they can work through how that might be a good idea. That can be a place where we talk about natural consequences, where if you say these things to this other person, they might start not liking you. And let's reflect together, child, about how that's kind of played out. It would be the sort of thing that Beck and I would do at our dinner table occasionally, where we discuss what do we do when someone's mean to us at school. And we reflect together about what that would look like and try to put into the mind of our kids the right behaviour in that particular situation. But too much of that is problematic as well. Because if everything is just about the effect of what you do, then is there a true moral code actually at the basis of all these things? And if it's all about reflecting and arguing and discussing and working it out, a really clever person can justify every single thing they ever want to do. Too much of the reflective parent actually robs a child of a clear moral code that everything they need to know about for when the tough times come and there's no time for discussion. And so what Paul's saying is you actually need both of these things. It's to save our kids from that particular situation where they can't cope with life. The role of fathers and the role of all people, to be honest, is to both train and instruct, to both discipline and to counsel, to say this is right and this is wrong, but also to have a discussion that puts something into their own minds. Which all sounds pretty good, right? Sounds logical. Go back to the verse. The other key parts in there that we haven't covered yet is that before it says training and instruction, it says this phrase, bring them up. And if we take that word out, what does that mean by bring up? It's almost like a gardening term or even a medical term. It's a sort of word that we could translate a different way. It wouldn't quite work with the grammar here, but it's helpful to know this is another meaning of the same word, is the word nourish. It's kind of like the idea that if you are into gardening and you plant a little thing, for a while there you'll water it every day till it gets settled, and you might put a stake next to it to hold it straight. But then over time, you would hope that the natural water of the world would be enough to supply its water needs, and you would remove the stake so it can stand on its own 2 feet. So like in terms of fertilizer, for those, again, to continue the gardening metaphor, you put a little bit of fertilizer continually over time. You don't put all of the fertilizer the tree will need for the rest 20 years of its life on it in one day, because that won't work. The bring them up idea is a gradual release of time where we allow the child to eventually be completely free on their own. That's part of the duty here. We train and instruct so that one day they're able to stand on their own 2 feet. That's what raise them up is a bit like. And that, I think, means for me a degree of intentionality. That there's something about parenting that requires us, this is what I'm learning at the moment anyway, is that we not just kind of let the world throw up at us the moments that are teachable. But I think, as I reflect on my role as a dad, I think I'm supposed to sometimes deliberately set time aside to bring up my children and intentionally go, okay, now is the time to learn this particular thing. It's a process, needs to be intentional. And I would say that if we don't do that, if we don't take the intentionality of raising up our children, the world will have its way and try and do it for us. I'm not quite sure Australia's got it all worked out when it comes to raising our children. If you were to go to other ancient cultures, other First Nations cultures, and compare the ways they raise their children, you are struck by the similarity in what was sometimes called rites of passage or initiation. This idea that there's certain things that need to be done so kids can learn certain things. And if you were to put them all next to each other, I've got a quote here from a book I read in preparing this message. James Hollis, he said, given the similarity of structure, sequence, and motive in the rites of passage among disparate and geographically separate cultures, one would have thought they're ceremonies ordained by some central committee. If you put them, like, it's almost like take Westerners out of it, take Australia out of it and compare all the other ones. It's almost like they've figured something out there about what kids need to learn to eventually be able to stand on their own 2 feet and face the world as it is. But what about what Australians do? My wife and I were reflecting, if we don't take initiation seriously, what are the initiations that Australia will give our kids without us having to do anything? If we decide we're not going to be intentional, we'll be passive, and we'll just let Australia do the initiations, what are the initiations in Australia? This is what we could come up with. If you go to the next slide for me. You get your driver's license at a certain age. There's a certain age where you're allowed to consume alcohol. There's a certain age where you're allowed to consent for sex, and there's a certain age about watching R-rated content. And that's pretty much it. If we don't as a church, as Christians, take seriously the responsibility to initiate our children, that is what they will be initiated into instead. And what do each of those symbolize? When your kid gets their driver's license, when I got it, what did everyone say? Finally, you have freedom. And when you get to have alcohol, it's like you get to escape how horrible the world is now. And when you get to have sex, yeah, you can have fun and pleasure all the time. And when you get to watch you just enjoy the profane and totally engage yourself in that. And all the other initiations of the world are basically the opposite of those. Like you grow up in a proper initiated culture that sees the role of boys and women to come up and stand and become members of their society. It's not about freedom at all. It's about actually doing something that's bigger than yourself. And yet all of ours are so much about self. There's a couple that aren't. But we mock them in Australia. The only ones I can think of that should be about something bigger than ourselves. Think about how in conversation we talk about these things. Getting a job, getting married, getting a home loan, getting to vote. Oh, you're getting a job. Now you're working for the man. You're getting married. Oh, now you're not free anymore. You're getting a home loan. Oh, you're trapped. We basically attribute all of those as to some form of slavery. The very things that pretty much every other culture says signals your arrival as a proper adult, we mock. So if we don't take seriously the responsibility to raise our children and let society do it for us, that is what we walk into. And how's that going so far? A lot of people in the room here are teachers, so you get to see it every day. Here's some stats from a survey last year from Mission Australia. 44% of youth were extremely or very concerned about coping with stress. 49.9% felt positive about the future. First time in that survey's history that less than half don't feel positive about the future. 28.8% psychological stress, 23.5% lonely all or most of the time. The great experiment of individualized initiation is not working for our young people. What we actually kind of do is we say, we're going to not do the initiation, we're going to let people self-initiate. It's almost like we've believed that self-actualization is a better form of initiation than a parent deliberately trying to raise their kid in a particular way. Hopefully, I've communicated the seriousness of the problem here. If I were you, but I'm a teacher, so I have this bias here, but when I hear a problem, I think, okay, so what's the curriculum that I need to cover to solve that problem, right? What's the thing I need to teach? I'll try and do that so I don't suck as a dad anymore, right? Maybe that's your inner dialogue right now. Maybe you're bored. I don't know. Hopefully you're with me. The end of the verse, I think, hides the key part about where we need to push kids towards. Because whose training and instruction are we to direct kids towards? It says it at the end of the verse, if you can put it back up for me. The Lord's one. What would the Lord train and instruct? That is where we need to get our curriculum from. So I've done a bit of research. I've read a couple of books. And here's some stuff I've found that you might find helpful. And if you're one of those people who like to take a dodgy little photo of a slide, you might check it later, this might be the one to take the picture of. It's by a guy named Richard Rohr. He's a Catholic Franciscan, which I don't know what that even means. I would say he's a very divergent thinker. And it's quite good to read people who don't think the same as you from time to time because it challenges your thinking. And he certainly has challenged my thinking. I don't agree with him on everything, but he reckons these 5 things are things every young person needs to learn. They're pretty hard things. Life is hard. You are not important. Your life is not about you. You are not in control and you are going to die. I read another book that took those 5 things and gave it a better spin. His name's John Tyson. His book's called The Intentional Father. I recommend it to you for the first 50 to 60% of the book, and I warn you that the last part of the book is very legalistic, and you're allowed to disagree with authors. That's a thing, right? But the first part is actually really good. And he takes those 5 and he describes them this way. So let's take the photo of this one, right? He says that growing up is learning that life is hard. And for the child, that means shifting from an understanding that life should be easy to actually a recognition that life is going to be difficult and we are up to the task. The fact that we're all here today is proof that we are up to hard things. It was probably hard just getting here, let alone living to this point in your life, right? We can get through hard things. Every young person needs to learn that life is not easy, it is hard, and you are up to the task. And to learn that you are not important, but other people are, and if you instead stop worrying about how things aren't going well for you and worry about how things are going for others, you can actually live a life of significant meaning. We need kids to learn that they're not, like everything's not about, they're not the center of the universe, but they are part of a story. They are not the story. There is a bigger story of which they can be a key part in. We are not in control, but we can surrender. And there is actually great safety if we surrender to the right things. And we are going to die, yes. And so what should our focus be? It shouldn't be on the temporal, but on the eternal. That's 5 things. I reckon they're good as. If you're wondering, what am I supposed to do with my life? What sort of things am I to learn? You should probably learn these things. We all need to learn these things. Richard Rohr says, if you don't teach your kids this, or if you as an adult haven't learned this, it gets bad. You can go to that quote again, that's fine. If we do not transform our pain, because all of them are painful to learn, right? What will we do instead? We will transmit it in some form. Let me try and explain what that means, because it's a bit esoteric. Life will teach us those lessons if we don't intentionally learn them. At some point, life will teach you that it is hard. No matter how much you want to deny it, it will teach you that. At some point, life will teach you you are not in control. At some point, life will teach you you are not that important. The question is not will life teach you, it's will you have the equipment needed to deal with that when it happens, or will it itself, that lesson, somewhat destroy you? We need to be able to transcend those 5 truths, to transform them and face them, because if we don't, we will transmit them onto other people. We would, another word for it is we would project it onto others. For example, when life teaches us that it is not about us, if we have not learnt that lesson already and how to transcend it, what will we do? We'll be annoyed about it. We will demand that our truth be heard. We will speak poorly of people who we perceive got a fairer deal than we did. We will seek security and status to cover up for our weakness, and then we will pass our deadness onto our children. People have not learned that these things are real and must be transcended and transformed, tend to push it out onto others because they can't deal with it themselves. You know this is your story when you are going through a really hard time and someone in your life sees that and somehow wants to trump you with more pain. Like that is them not able to deal, and instead they're projecting. But this really cool quote by a German philosopher whose name I can't pronounce. Carl Jung, I think is right. He wrote a long time ago. And if you know anything about your German history, this is just before the Nazis took over. I mention that because a regret I suspect he would have of his life is that he did not speak up against the Nazism in his nation. I don't think he was anti-Semitic, but he did not speak up. And I mention that just in case you want to go and read all of his stuff later on. That's probably a helpful thing to know. He was not a Nazi, but he was like the next year after he wrote this, that happened. Anyway, a bit of a history lesson for you. This here, I think, just captures beautifully. And if you're into your philosophy or want to become interested in philosophy, like this is cool. But if you're not, just stick with me for a bit and then we'll kind of project one more place. If you can, it's just like someone who's dealt with those 5 things that I've talked about, right? If you can imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections. So if you can think of it, like imagine there's someone out there who took all those things I've just talked about and has stopped projecting their weaknesses onto other people and actually gone, yes, life is hard and I own that. It is not about me and I own that. I am going to die and I own that. If you can get someone who's that good, that's taken all that away and put it back on themselves. Next slide for me. Then you would get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Like if you take all that on, right, and you go, okay, me, yeah, I get it, I got to see it from my perspective. What you're left with is a fairly heavy burden. He calls it the shadow world, the shadow of the things that you have not properly dealt with that are yours to own. So if you have someone who's able to go, I'm not going to stop projecting, I'm just going to own that life is hard, you'll have a thick shadow. Then, next bit. Such a man has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself as he is now unable to say that they do this or that they are wrong and they must be fought against. Instead, he lives in the house of the gathering, which is a metaphor for, he says, is a room full of light that exposes all of who you truly are. If you're willing to stop projecting and instead see your dark shadow, you will stop then having a go at everyone else around you. Next part. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself. Deep things. It continues. And if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic, unsolved social problems of the day. Wow. If all we do as people growing up is deal with our own stuff, we have done something massive. And I read all that and I'm like, oh yeah, come on, all right, yeah. Some of you might read that and go, oh, I don't think I'm up to it. You know? You might be thinking, my dad didn't prepare me for that. So I just want to end by pivoting one last time on that last part of that verse. So it says, of the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Do not raise your children in such a way that they cannot cope with life as it really is. But instead, train and instruct, teach them a moral code, and discuss with them why things are the way they are. Raise them up, gradually release over time so they can stand on their own 2 feet. But the most important 3 words is the of the Lord part, right? The rest of it, you could try and do in your own strength, and you will stuff up. I do every day. So what does of the Lord mean? It doesn't just mean his curriculum. When we're raising our kids with the training instruction of the Lord, yes, we should do those things that God wants us to do, that curriculum, that order of true things that we all need to learn so we can live and deal and cope. We need to do that, but it's not just his curriculum. It also means him as a person. I don't know, today's probably the best day to reflect on this idea, right? But one of the key things that Jesus did for us in what he did on the cross is he made us the children of God. He made us sons and daughters of the Father. Here's a few verses to prove it, just because I like a good argument. Right to all him who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. He predestined us for adoption to himself as children through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you've received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. See what kind of love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. I have an awesome dad. I'm very lucky to have him. remember this one time when I was young, I was doing a thing called Little Athletics. Anyone heard of Little Athletics? Yes. As you can see, I'm obviously an incredible athlete. I didn't win anything almost ever. My dad, when he was young, actually was a very good athlete. And so I think he probably hoped that his genes would pass on to me in that regard. They didn't. I'm just average. But anyway, I was at Little Athletics, doing I think we were lining up for the 100-metre sprint, which is the one race I could finish in the top 3. So that was kind of my best I could hope for anyway. Because my dad at that time was still quite a lot younger, he would use that opportunity while I was at Little Athletics to continue doing his own training. He was still pretty fit back in those days. And so he was doing like stretches and little short sprints and all this sort of stuff, kind of way over 100 metres that way, while all us little kids who were like 7 or 8 were lining up ready for the 100 metres. The other kids didn't know that that was my dad. And they all started mocking him. Who's this old, silly man who thinks he's still an athlete? How ridiculous. And I heard them doing that. And as just a little kid who thinks their dad's the world, I just broke down in absolute tears, absolute meltdown, and ran screaming to my father, thinking this is this terrible injustice that has been done. How dare these kids say these things about my father? And I got over to my dad and I told them what they said. And he said, I don't care. It did not faze him even a little bit. And on that day, my dad taught me something. He taught me that the opinions of fools matters nothing, right? I reckon all of us have lessons like that our fathers have taught us. Things that when we look back, that was something that actually was really helpful. When Beck and I had Orson, our 4th child who's got significant disabilities, but to tell our parents, obviously, at one point, it's a really hard conversation to have. And I remember both my mum and dad actually were just so calm about it. Like it didn't devastate them. It's almost like they believed straight away that it'd be okay. That was so helpful. At the time, I probably thought they should have overreacted more. But looking back, I'm like, actually, that was the first person we chatted to about it that didn't have a breakdown in front of us when we were telling them. And I think that was just such a valuable lesson for me at that moment. I literally have a list of 10 things my dad taught me that I'm going to give him one day. I don't know when. I hope all of us have a list of things that either a father or a father figure has taught us. But here's the key bit, right? Your father can't teach you everything. I've got some really good stories about cool things my dad has taught me. He taught me that integrity is more important than salary. And he has quit more than a couple of jobs because he could have got more money, but his integrity felt under threat, so he left. That's how good is that to have a dad who teaches you that lesson? That's so awesome, right? But he hasn't taught me everything. Because he didn't think that to bring me up was just a job of him to be God. He didn't want me to have a relationship with him as my dad and for dad to be the representation of God and the only person I ever got to know. My father wanted me to know the ultimate father, knowing that every gap that he would leave, the ultimate father can fill. And so when we say, fathers, bring your kids up in the instruction and training of the Lord, it means have a red hot go. There's a lot of good you can do. And gosh, do our kids in this world need good dads and good mums and good other adults in their life who aren't related to them but who are willing to invest in their kids a little bit. We need those people desperately. But we will leave gaps. And those gaps can all be filled if our kids can just meet the ultimate father. Now, I don't know if you've reflected much on how good that news is. If you read the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, he's a pretty scary God, the Old Testament God. I know we often have theological lessons where we try and pretend that's not the case. It is a bit the case. He's pretty judgy. Whoa, don't do that or we all die. Okay, yeah, right, yes, sure. And then Jesus comes along and says, through me, you become children of God. And I think for the ancient audience, they probably understood it and we have lost that understanding of it. But what that means is, if your kid's sick and it's 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, they just come knocking on your door like that's no big deal, right? And that's such a good metaphor. And I didn't come up with that. The late Tim Keller came up with that. He said, check out this tweet. This is where I want to land. The only person who dares wake up a king at 3 a.m. for a glass of water is a child. And we, as Christians, have that kind of access. I don't want you to leave today thinking, I'm not a good enough dad. I want you to leave thinking there's a great responsibility that dads have. And we can do some real good in the world, and gosh, do we need to do that. But nothing beats introducing our children to that ultimate Father who will fill every gap that we leave and heal every wound that we inflict upon our poor children. I'm so sorry to my kids that they had to put up with me as their dad, but I know if I keep bringing them to church and if God is faithful and I pray for them daily, He may indeed save them, and that is all they actually will ever need. If you don't have a dad, if you have the Father, you have access to Him at 3 a.m. for a glass of water. That's the access we have to the King of the universe. This is the stuff I've been thinking about lately. I've got 4 boys. My eldest just turned 13. I want to be a good dad. What does that mean? I think it means something like this. Giving it a red hot crack. Understanding some of the things our kids need to learn so they can stand on their own 2 feet. But ultimately, the best job a dad can do is introduce their kids to the ultimate Father. You with me? Let me pray for you. God of the universe, You are our dad. You're the good one who doesn't stuff it up, who risks it all to save us, who doesn't abandon us in our sin, but while we were still unlovable, You loved us. You haven't given up on us. You're not rude. You're not in our face demanding our attention, but if we ask You what we need to do, You say that You'll respond. God, may each of us as adults turn to You again as Father and enjoy the love and forgiveness and peace that transcends all understanding that only You can give. And may we all, as adults in this room, as teenagers in this room, take seriously our responsibility to raise up each other, but to ultimately turn people to You. Amen.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did and you want more Lifepoint content, subscribe to our channel right now. Or if you're in the area around Moreton Bay or Rothwell, head to our service. Sunday, we'd love to see you there. lifepoint.org.au for all the details. We'll see you soon.